But,
sorry, guys. The Mona Lisa, Starry Night, the Venus de Milo, King Tut's burial mask. All of these are wonderful pieces of art. What would Indiana Jones say? Well, he'd probably say something like, "This belongs in a museum." But the question is, which museum? Should the Egyptians have all of the mummies ever made? Should Russian museums have all of the world supply of Fabergé eggs? I think the world would suffer if that were to happen. But what right should home countries have on artifacts that were removed centuries ago after being conquered by an invading army or colonized by another country? In order to have a clear understanding of this issue, first we will look at the ancient roots of this practice. Then we will examine some of the atrocities of the early 20th century. And finally, we will hear about what the international community is doing to combat this type of behavior. Looting began in ancient times. It was mentioned in the Old Testament. King Shishak of Egypt attacked Jerusalem and took away the treasures of the Lord's temple and the royal palace. He took everything, including the gold shields that Solomon had made. Those artifacts were spoils of war, and since conquest and wars are a continuing cycle, they tend to get passed around quite a bit. When the Romans controlled Egypt, they removed many artifacts to Europe. The city of Rome was then sacked 7 times, and the goods were again distributed amongst the victors. Another good example of this is the Rosetta Stone. It was created around 200 BC as an Egyptian royal decree. It was written in 3 languages. Over the years, it was moved around by the Egyptian people and ended up as part of a building, part of a wall, until it was discovered by a French soldier in 1799. The French did not get to keep it for long. It was soon taken by the British during the Napoleonic Wars. And today it sits in the British Museum. The Rosetta Stone was instrumental in the translating of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics and has made all of the Egyptian culture much more understandable. Ironically, if it had never been looted by that French soldier and then looted again by the British, those translations would never have happened, and the Rosetta Stone would just be part of a wall somewhere. Even the obelisk at St. Peter's Square is an example of this practice. It was taken to Egypt by Caligula, and it was installed where the Vatican sits today. Numerous early Christians were executed on that spot, and it is now controlled by the very people that were executed there. The oldest known example of looting is the stele of Naram Sin. A stele is an upright stone that is inscribed with commemorative information, symbols, pictures, etc. This one was created about 4,000 years ago to celebrate a military victory and then stolen as wartime plunder 3,000 years ago. Now let's move on to some more modern times. As the Nazis captured and conquered Europe, they systematically looted art and important cultural items. They even had a department called the ERR. Its mission was just to seize art collections of the Jewish and other Jewish objects. They seized hundreds of thousands of objects and even displayed some of them in a Paris art exhibition. Indiana Jones was not really being chased by them. They didn't really try to steal the Ark of the Covenant, but they did steal and loot many Jewish treasures. As they captured cities, they would enter the museums and remove anything that they wanted. There were even plans to extract these priceless items well before the war began. According to Robert Edsel, the author of Monuments Men, there were definitely works of art they were determined to steal. An example would be the so-called Big Three from Krakow: Leonardo's Lady with an Ermine, Rembrandt's Landscape with a Good Samaritan, and Raphael's Portrait of a Young Man. The Nazis seized all of them within 2 months of the 1939 invasion. The Polish government estimates that 43% of all Polish cultural items were destroyed or stolen during those years. As the Nazis collected and transported the ill-begotten goods, some of them were skimmed off the top and became part of the illicit art trade. After the war, the problem continued as the Allied forces worked to restore order. They found these vast caches of art, and again, some art was skinned off the top. It got so bad that they had to mark the caches in the same way that they marked unexploded bombs, just to keep away the looters. In the years that followed, there was a large explosion of illicit art trade. And it has taken some time, but now the international community is working together to sort out these issues. On November 14th, 1970, UNESCO, which was a portion of the United Nations, signed an act to prevent the illicit import and export of culturally significant goods. The agreement has been signed by 123 countries, but the United States did not sign until 1983. According to Noah Charting, a prominent art blogger, the short version of what was agreed upon is this: no objects of cultural importance could be excavated or exported from the source nation without the elaborate permission of the national government. Well, that does seem pretty clear-cut. In the art trade world, any piece of art that does not have a clear record that extends prior to 1970 will not be handled by a reputable art dealer. It also will not be held in a reputable museum. So the 1970 Act did help quell a great deal of the trade of post-1970 finds. But what should the world do with all the pieces of art that have been held by museums for centuries? There are thousands of Egyptian artifacts held in the Metropolitan Museum of Art alone. I doubt that many visitors to an Egyptian museum would be awed by the 600th Canoptic jar. But if these less significant objects are dispersed, they can provide a more widespread interest in the source country. For the most significant objects, like the Rosetta Stone, no matter how the object was obtained, the source country should have some sort of reparations, whether it is return of the item or perhaps, rental of the item or money. Zahi Hawass, the former head of the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities, has been leading the charge to have some of these more culturally significant antiques returned to Egypt. Among those items is the Rosetta Stone. In his own words, if the British want to be remembered, if they want to restore their reputation, they should volunteer to return the Rosetta Stone because it is an icon of Egyptian identity. Some items continue to be returned. Several of the art pieces that the French took from Italy in Napoleon's time have been returned. The Metropolitan Museum of Art recently returned a crater to Italy, and Japan has returned around 1,000 cultural items to South Korea just recently that were taken during their colonization period. This problem of stolen cultural pieces has ebbed and flowed for many centuries. During World War II, it was at its highest peak in modern times. Since then, the international community has come together to combat the issue. It is a pretty complicated issue, with many different ways to view the ownership of art. Although there are still a lot of discrepancies in who owns what, hopefully they will be resolved at some point, and all the people of the world will be able to enjoy these for centuries to come. Does anybody have any questions they would like to ask today?
Yes. How do you have a crater in a museum, and how would you give it back?
Okay, that's a great question, Phoenix. So a crater is actually something that's in between a vase and a bowl, and in ancient times they used it to mix water and wine together because they drank a lot of wine back then. So they would mix it in there, and there was a lot of designs and different things, a lot of pottery that had lots of significant value. Does anybody else have any questions? Yes, ma'am. What would you like to ask today?
Rosetta Stone, is that where the popular language learning software comes from? Is that where the name comes from?
Well, yes, it does. Since the Rosetta Stone, the actual stone, was used, it's probably the most famous piece of translation anywhere. It seems like a very good name for a translation software that's sweeping the nation. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, thanks everybody for their time, and thank you to my camera person over there. He's doing a great job.